quickly introduce you to how to use Fusion 360, and we're going to use some basic tools within the program to create these objects that you can see right now. They're not hard to create, but once you learn the basic tools on how to build on things, you can create some quite complex models. So the first thing you need to do is to open Fusion. So this is what you'll get when you first open it. Obviously you won't have that, that's something else. The first thing you want to check is if the layout grid is on. So to do that, you come down here and you tick layout grid. Now when it's off, it's just white, but when it's on, you can see some defined grids and the origin here, which is the center point from which the canvas rotates. So that will help you to line things up, especially when you're sketching and trying to align parts. Over here on the left is the browser. When you add bodies, actually I'll show you on here. When you add bodies or components, everything will show up here. So you've got joints, your sketches, your components, and your bodies, which will all show. And you can rename them, but I've put these into different components, which I'll get onto later. So this turning the origin on helps you to choose planes to sketch on, turning the sketches on. When I go through here, I should really name them, but you can see this sketch here, sketch number 2, was used to create this profile here, and then I've added other sketches to remove parts and add parts. So that's how you work in Fusion. You start with basic sketches and then you add on each time to create more complex models, because creating this in a single go is quite time consuming and it's not really possible in Fusion. So you're better off creating multiple sketches and then extruding them. So you've got a couple of workspaces. You've got your design, your generative, render. Generative is more for artificial intelligence, using the computer's algorithms to create forms, as you can see in the image. The render is more for creating renders and photorealistic images of your models. Animation is self-explanatory, and simulation is similar to generative, but I won't get into that at the moment. So within the design workspace, this is the workspace that you'll be using 99% of the time. You've got a couple of tools that will help you create things, and then once you've created them, these sets of tools are used to modify that part. So if you had an edge, for example, here, we've got this, I wanted to add a fillet, like a small curve on the edge. You would go into the modify menu and then fillet, or you can hit the F key. These are the shortcuts. It's really helpful to use shortcuts. Now the reason you would add something like a fillet is because nothing in real life is completely sharp, so everything has a small fillet to it. Now these fillets in renders help to create a sense of realism because the light reflects off them differently. So you'd use this set of tools to create and modify those parts. So if we wanted to create something, let's go back to the keynote. If we wanted to create a cylinder, for example, you would then hit create sketch. Now what happens is, now you have to tell Fusion on which axis do you want to create that sketch. So if we go back to here, the cylinder's going back, so we want to use this plane, so we just hit left click with the mouse, and then now once you're in the sketch workspace within design, this will show up once you choose a plane. You can then choose the tools that you want to use to create a sketch. Now again, use these to create and then these to modify. So we know it's a circle, so it's quite easy. We just hit that and then start at the origin. You don't have to start at the origin, but you can start over here if you want. It just makes things easier if you start at the origin. But when you click and drag in any tool, you can set the dimension of that. So let's just say 75 millimeters. Hit enter. Now when it's blue, that means that it's a completed sketch. So if I was just to quickly trim this, I'll get onto this in a minute. But if there was a line missing or there was a gap in the sketch, it wouldn't be blue and you wouldn't be able to extrude that, at least not in the solid workspace. I'll get onto that later on. But for now, I'll just go back. Oh, by the way, when I click any button on the keyboard, it'll show up here, just in case you can't hear me. So then, once you've created your sketch, hit finish, and now we've got a sketch in midair. Now that's not really useful. What we need to do is to turn that into a 3D model. So there's a couple of tools you can use. You can extrude, which, if you click on it, you can extrude that profile, to whatever length you want. You can use a Revolve or Loft, which I will do in a second once we've finished this. So let's just guess, it doesn't really matter the length, that'll do. So we've created that, and you hit enter. Now let's try and create this part underneath. So what we should do is hit M for move, and then tap the object, and just drag it up to about that height. So what we should do is we'll hit create a new sketch on the bottom plane. Now we know if we hit the rectangle tool, we're just going to guess and say be about that big. So now we've got a rectangle. Now it looks like it's going through the middle of the circle, but if we hit finish, we can see it's below because we created it on that plane. But if you look at the PowerPoint, you can see that this actually comes up to about halfway through. So how do we create a sketch that's in midair? For this, we would use the construct menu. Now, because everything's created through sketches, we need to offset the plane to the height that we want the sketch plane. So if we move, you can see where it intersects, so we'll just say about there. So now what we can do is we can create another sketch at this height, not that height. So if we go there, now if we create another one, we'll just say there. That'll do. Now if we hit finish, you can see if we move around, we've got two sketches at two different heights, and one of them is intersecting. So now we're going to turn this into a 3D object by hitting the Loft tool. So what this does is enable you to join two different sketches together at different heights. So these lines are showing you what it'll look like. We don't want it to cut, we want it to join. So that'll create a new body. But by the way, if anything's red, that means it'll be cut, just so you know. So now that we hit join, we'll ignore that for now. That's okay, so now we've created our first test object. It doesn't look too dissimilar from that, but it's the same principle. So now you could repeat that process in reverse. Start with a plane on the bottom, a smaller rectangle, offset that plane, create a bigger sketch, and then you can copy that object to create another one on top. So for something more organic like this, if you're modeling a wire of some kind or a wire frame, for example, we'll create an offset one. Turn this body off. We don't want to sketch, turn the origin on. We don't want to sketch on this plane here, because that is right in the middle of our model. So because it's off to the side, we've offset the plane again. Now we're going to create a sketch. So right click, create a sketch, or you can hit that and then hit this. So now because it's more organic, we want to use this tool, the Spline tool. Now these will create geometric shapes, but if you hit the Spline tool and start somewhere over here, click, and then it might look like a straight line, but as soon as you make another point and then move it, you can see it changes depending on where your mouse is going. So if we just go and create a couple of points, now once you've finished, hit the tick, and then what you get is the finished line. And if you just hit the escape key, you can grab these green handles here. So if you click on a dot, and then you can adjust the handle, so you can adjust the width and the angle. Now you can see that affects the whole model. Now it's up to you how you do it, but just make it however you want. And now we want to finish that. But as you can see in the PowerPoint, it's not a line, because if we extruded this, we can't extrude it because it's not an object. It's not a profile of any kind. So what we need to do is tell the program, right, we want to extrude a cylinder along this space. So the first thing we need to do is go to plane along path, that one. So we're going to create a plane like we did with these ones, but we're going to tell it we're going to create this along this path. So if you just click anywhere on the line and click OK, now you see that the sketch plane that we've got is actually on an angle, so it's perpendicular to that line. Now that would change depending on where you put the plane, but I've put it on the end. Create a sketch. Now this origin here is the center of that line, as you can see. So if we just hit C for circle, or go up to the top, create a circle, whatever diameter you want, that'll do. Now finish the sketch. Now you can see, when my computer stops freezing, that we've got a sketch line here from which we're going to extrude from, and this profile which we're actually going to extrude. So what we should do is go to the create, and what we're going to do is we're going to sweep this profile along this line to create a 3D object. So first we click the profile, which is this one, and then we click the path, and of course there's an error. Why is that doing that? Okay. Right, so sometimes you might get this error. So if I just turn it on and off again, you see it's going to intersect itself. So what that means is the circle that I've created is actually too wide. So when it gets to this point, it's going to intersect itself when it sweeps back on itself. So what we should do is go back to the sketch, which is that one. Double click on it. And then if we hit D on the keyboard and click on the circle, you can give it a dimension. So we'll give it 4. So it's quite a small one. Now, whether it'll intersect or not will depend on how tight this curve is, wherever it is on the sketch, and how wide this is. And I've just made it quite small just to show you that it'll work. Go to create, sweep this profile, and then path. Click the path. So now you can see that we've got a 3D object that curves around that line that we created. Click OK. You can see that. Now, I know it's slightly different, but the principle is the same. So now that we've done that, what if we wanted to create something as simple as a sphere? How do we do that? There's quite a few ways you can do it. The easiest way is to create a sphere. Now you tell it which plane, so we'll just pick the bottom one for now. Let's move the view. Click a point, and then you can set the diameter of the sphere. Now another way of doing it is to create a sketch. We'll just create it on the bottom plane for now. So now we're looking top down. If we go to circle and then create a circle. Now if we split this down the middle and then hit T for trim on the keyboard, or you can go up here, trim the lines that we don't want. So we only want half of the circle, so we're going to get rid of one half and then get rid of these offcuts. So now what we're going to do is revolve this to create a sphere. It's two different ways of doing it, but like with everything in Fusion, there's not a single way to do anything. Everyone has their own way, so I'm just showing you these two for now. So to revolve, we're going to get this profile and we're going to rotate it around this axis to create a 3D object. So we've selected the profile. Now we need to tell it where do we want it to revolve around. We don't want it to revolve around this. If I click this, you can see it creates like a donut shape, but we don't want that. So we tell it that we're going to rotate it around this axis. Now that should create a sphere. But if you don't want it to rotate all the way around, you can click this and drag, and you can tell it what angle you want it to rotate at. So if you wanted it 195 degrees, you can tell it I only want you to rotate this shape 190 degrees around. Now that can be quite useful if you're creating more complex objects, but if you just want a sphere, it might be easier just to create a sphere using the other technique. So there's a couple of different ways that you can create very simple objects. Now for something like this, it's the same principle. You just create a couple of sketches, extrude them, and then a couple of sketches looking downwards with that shape, basically with a rectangle cut out, and then you extrude that through to create these shapes. Now one useful tip is, if you see at the bottom here, this is the history toolbar. So if we did something that we didn't like, we can grab this scrubber and then go back to before we created the spheres or before we created that sweep, and then we can edit them, and then you can come back to the current view. So for example, if we wanted to change the profile of this sweep but we didn't want to make a whole new one, you just go back through your sketches and then click on it, and we can see it's highlighting this one. If we double click on that, it'll take us back to when we created that sketch. So as an example, I'll just move this up. Now if we hit finish, what the computer has done is it's run all of these actions again, finishing these, but it's created this to that new shape. So that's an easy way of doing that, changing something in the past without creating a whole new object. So I think that's probably it for a basic introduction. I'm going to go through these tools in depth in other videos, but if, for example, you wanted to use the sphere tool quite a lot, it's a bit time consuming to go all the way up here and all the way down here to click sphere. So what you can do is you can left click on these three dots and then pin to toolbar, so you've got it up here. You can set the shortcuts if you want, so E is for extrude, H is to create a hole, and you've got F for fillet, and then M for move and copy. They're the ones that you're probably going to use the most, but you can set your own if you really want to. So yeah, that was it for a quick introduction into Fusion.